Listen to me very carefully, because what just happened inside the United States government is not a political headline, it is not a partisan argument, and it is not something you can afford to scroll past and ignore. The President of the United States, the most powerful elected official on the face of this earth, just looked at a direct, specific, unambiguous order from the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest judicial authority in the entire constitutional system, and said no, not privately, not through legal maneuvering, publicly, openly, and defiantly. And the moment he did that, a historic impeachment resolution, House Resolution 353, was filed to remove him from office. I am MIESELS, and I have been covering the collision of political power and financial reality long enough to tell you with complete certainty that what is unfolding in Washington right now is not drama. It is a constitutional earthquake, and the aftershocks are going to reach your wallet, your rights, and your future, whether you're paying attention or not. If you are new to this channel, this is where we follow the raw truth behind the power plays in Washington. No corporate spin, no mainstream media filter, no agenda except the facts and the financial consequences they produce. The analysis I'm about to deliver to you is the kind of political and economic intelligence that costs serious money to access from the right sources, and I am giving it to you completely free right now. The only price is a subscription to this channel and your commitment to stay informed. Hit that subscribe button immediately, because the people who understand what is happening before it fully lands are always the ones who come out ahead. To understand why this moment is genuinely different from every other Trump versus the courts confrontation we have watched over the last several years, you need to understand the specific sequence of events that brought us to this constitutional breaking point, because context is not optional here. Context is everything. This morning began as what appeared to be a significant and legitimate legal victory for the Trump administration. The Supreme Court issued a ruling striking down the excessive use of nationwide injunctions, the legal mechanism that lower courts, particularly courts in more liberal jurisdictions, had been using to block Trump's executive orders across the entire country before they could even be fully implemented. Trump celebrated loudly and publicly. His administration framed it as a monumental victory for the Constitution, for the separation of powers, and for the presidency itself. Trump stood before cameras and talked about the happiness and spirit he was seeing across the country, about his historic mandate, about radical left judges who had been trying to overrule the rightful powers of the president. For approximately 1 hour, the mood inside the Trump White House was triumphant, and then the same Supreme Court that had just handed him that victory issued a second and entirely separate order, a direct, concrete, non-negotiable instruction about immigration enforcement. The court ordered Trump to reinstate legal protections for asylum seekers that his administration had stripped away. The court ordered him to stop deporting people without providing the legally required hearings and due process protections. The court ordered his administration to make genuine, verifiable efforts to locate and return individuals who had already been deported illegally, people with valid legal claims to remain in the United States who had been rushed out of the country in violation of federal law and constitutional due process. These were not suggestions. These were not recommendations. These were not guidelines open to executive interpretation. They were concrete, specific, legally binding instructions from 9 justices of the United States Supreme Court. And Trump's response was to refuse to comply. Now, let me be surgically precise about what the Supreme Court actually ordered, because the details matter enormously and the media is going to muddy them with partisan framing on both sides. For months before this ruling, lower federal courts at multiple levels had been finding that Trump's immigration enforcement policies were violating both federal statutory law and the constitutional guarantee of due process. The specific violations documented by these courts included conducting mass deportations without providing individuals the hearings they are legally entitled to under both domestic law and treaty obligations, detaining people without bond hearings in violation of established legal procedure, denying asylum claims without giving claimants the legally mandated process for presenting their cases, and in some of the most serious documented instances, deporting individuals who had active, valid legal claims to remain in the United States, people who had not had their cases properly heard and resolved, and then refusing to make any effort to bring those people back after courts ruled the deportations were illegal. Trump appealed every adverse ruling, fighting through the court system until the cases reached the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court sided with the lower courts. The order was clear, the legal obligation was unambiguous, and the constitutional authority behind it was absolute. There is no serious legal argument that a president has the discretion to simply ignore a direct Supreme Court order because he disagrees with it on policy grounds. Trump's claim that immigration enforcement is a purely executive function over which he has unlimited discretion is not a recognized legal principle. It is a political assertion dressed in constitutional language. The Supreme Court, including the justices Trump himself appointed, did not accept that argument. They issued the order anyway, and Trump said no. He is claiming the court has no authority to dictate the operational details of how he enforces immigration law. He is claiming his mandate from the voters supersedes judicial oversight. He is claiming that his executive discretion in this area is essentially unlimited. I have been watching this man operate for years, and I want to be honest with you. I have seen him push boundaries. I have seen him test limits. I have seen him fight courts aggressively and sometimes successfully, but this is categorically different. This is not pushing a boundary. This is blowing through the foundational wall of the entire constitutional structure and daring Congress to stop him. Now, let me tell you exactly what House Resolution 353 is, what it contains, and why the people who filed it believe this impeachment has a stronger constitutional foundation than either of the two that came before it. Representative Shri Thanadar and the Democratic members who introduced HRES 353 are making a specific, focused, and legally grounded argument. So the resolution documents Trump's defiance of the Supreme Court order in explicit detail. It lays out the pattern of conduct, not just this single incident, but the broader documented history of the administration treating court orders as optional obstacles rather than binding legal requirements. And it argues that this conduct constitutes the textbook constitutional definition of high crimes and misdemeanors under Article 2, Section 4 of the United States Constitution. That provision is unambiguous. The president shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. The legal scholars and constitutional authorities who have analyzed this situation are largely in agreement on one core point. Defying a direct Supreme Court order is among the clearest possible examples of a high crime and misdemeanor because it represents a direct assault on the separation of powers, places the president explicitly above the law, and undermines the entire constitutional architecture that the founders constructed specifically to prevent executive tyranny. The resolution has entered the House Judiciary Committee, where the process of hearings and votes will begin, with Democrats holding the House majority. Impeachment can pass on a simple majority vote, a lower threshold than the Senate conviction standard. The Senate is where the genuine battle will be fought, because removing a president requires a two-thirds supermajority, meaning at minimum 17 Republican senators would need to join every Democratic senator in voting to convict. That is a high bar. But the political and constitutional dynamics surrounding this specific impeachment make that bar more achievable than it has ever been in the Trump era. And I want to explain precisely why. Here is why this impeachment is fundamentally and structurally different from the two that preceded it, and why the political calculus for Republican members of Congress is more dangerous and more complicated this time than it has ever been before. The first impeachment over Ukraine was built on disputed facts and competing interpretations of executive authority and foreign policy. There was genuine room for Republicans to argue about what the evidence showed and what legal standard applied. The second impeachment over January 6th involved contested questions about the limits of First Amendment protection for political speech and the precise causal chain between Trump's words and the actions of the people who stormed the Capitol. Again, room for legal and factual argument. This impeachment has neither of those escape routes available. The Supreme Court issued a clear, written, publicly available, legally binding order. The Trump administration is publicly and openly refusing to comply with that order. Those are objective, verifiable, documentable facts that require no interpretation, no disputed witness testimony, and no competing legal theory to establish. Every Republican member of Congress who votes against this impeachment is going to be on record saying that a president is allowed to ignore the Supreme Court. They are not going to be able to argue about the facts. They are going to have to argue that the law does not apply to this president, and that argument is politically catastrophic in ways that defending the Ukraine conduct or even January 6th was not, because the rule of law and respect for the Supreme Court are not partisan values. They are foundational American values that cut across party lines and that a significant portion of Republican voters still hold seriously. The 2026 midterm election timing makes this even more politically explosive for vulnerable Republicans. Every Democrat running in a competitive district is going to campaign on a single, simple, devastating message. Your Republican representative voted to let the president ignore the Supreme Court. That message does not require context or explanation. It lands immediately, and it lands hard with exactly the kinds of moderate, suburban, rule of law oriented voters who have been drifting away from the Republican Party since 2020. The historical parallel here is impossible to ignore and deeply important to understand. The most infamous example of presidential defiance of the Supreme Court in American history is Andrew Jackson's response to Worcester versus Georgia, in which the court ruled in favor of the Cherokee Nation's sovereign rights, and Jackson reportedly refused to enforce the ruling, which led directly to the Trail of Tears. One of the most morally catastrophic episodes in American history. Historians have condemned Jackson for that defiance for nearly 2 centuries. Trump is walking the exact same constitutional path today, and the human cost of his illegal deportations, real people with valid legal claims removed from the country in violation of the law, is already documented and already irreversible for those individuals. Now I need to bring this home to what it actually means for you, because information without consequence is just noise, and I refuse to waste your time with noise. The numbers do not lie. And the numbers surrounding a potential Trump impeachment and removal are numbers that every American with money in the market, a mortgage, a business, or a retirement account needs to understand right now. Political instability at the presidential level produces market volatility. That is not an opinion. That is a documented, repeatable historical fact. Every serious impeachment proceeding in American history has produced measurable uncertainty in financial markets as investors attempt to price in the probability and consequences of a presidential transition. If HRES 353 moves through the House and advances to a Senate trial, you should expect increased volatility across equity markets. So as that uncertainty gets priced in, you should expect potential movement in the dollar as international investors reassess the stability of the American political and legal system. You should expect volatility in sectors most directly tied to government policy, defense, healthcare, energy, financial services, as the market attempts to model what a Mike Pence presidency or a post-Trump Republican administration would do differently. Stop being a victim of political developments you refuse to think about financially. The connection between what happens in Washington and what happens to your net worth is direct, measurable, and completely predictable. If you are paying attention, you are broke and you do not even know it. Not because you are not working hard enough, but because you are treating political earthquakes as entertainment instead of as financial intelligence that requires a strategic response. The people who will come out of this period ahead are not the people who are most emotionally invested in the political outcome. They are the people who understand what each possible outcome means for asset prices, for monetary policy, for regulatory environments, and for the structural stability of the institutions that underpin the value of every investment they own. Cash is trash in an inflationary environment, but cash is also dangerous in a politically unstable environment because the institutions that back the value of that cash depend on the rule of law functioning reliably. When a president defies the Supreme Court, he is not just defying a legal order, he is attacking the credibility of the institutional framework that gives the American dollar and American markets their global reputation for reliability and rule of law protection. International capital flows into American markets precisely because investors around the world trust that the American legal and constitutional system provides predictable, enforceable property rights and contract enforcement. The moment that trust is seriously damaged, and open presidential defiance of the Supreme Court is among the most serious possible attacks on that trust, you will start to see that capital look for alternative destinations. I do not care about your feelings about Trump's immigration policies. I do not care about your feelings about the Democratic members who filed this impeachment resolution. I care about your money, and your money is sitting in a system whose foundational credibility is being actively tested right now by a president who has decided that the rules do not apply to him. Whether Congress rises to that challenge or fails it is the most consequential political and financial question in America today, and the answer is going to come faster than most people realize. Let me close by putting this directly to you, because I believe in straight talk and I have no interest in wrapping hard truth in comfortable packaging. America is standing at a fork in the road that the founders specifically designed the impeachment mechanism to address. One path leads to Congress doing its constitutional duty, holding a president accountable for openly defying the Supreme Court, reaffirming that no person and no office is above the law, and sending a message to every future occupant of the White House that there are real, painful, non-negotiable consequences for treating court orders as optional. The other path leads to Congress looking at naked, documented, publicly admitted the presidential defiance of the highest court in the land and deciding that political loyalty to one man is more important than the constitutional structure that protects every American's rights and every investor's property. If Congress chooses the second path, they hand every future president a loaded weapon. They tell the world that American institutions are only as strong as the political will of the majority party to enforce them, and that when a president decides the rules do not apply to him, there is no real check on his power. That is not democracy. That is the slow, polite, respectable-looking slide into authoritarianism. And it is exactly what the founders built the impeachment power to prevent. So I am asking you directly right now, are you going to be a winner who understands the constitutional, political, and financial stakes of this moment, who positions themselves intelligently ahead of the volatility this process is going to produce, and who stays informed and engaged as this unfolds? Or are you going to be a loser who treats this as background noise, changes nothing, prepares for nothing, and wonders later why everything shifted while they were not watching? The choice is yours, and it is urgent. Subscribe. Share this video. Leave your answer in the comments. America is watching, and the receipts of this moment will be read for generations.